Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by award-winning author, reporter, and journalist, Roni Robbins. Roni has decades of experience as a reporter, and she's got an award-winning book, so we're going to be talking to her about her experience in her book and everything that she's been up to. So, Roni, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for allowing me to be here and talk to your audience.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
So, as you said, I've been a journalist for almost 4 decades now and about 37 years. I've written for some big publications like the Huffington Post and Forbes and New York Daily News, WebMD. I'm presently freelancing for Atlanta Journal-Constitution, a local newspaper, and a local daily newspaper, and also Medscape WebMD. And some 20 years ago, my mom gave me cassette tapes that I used to create a novel. I worked on it when I was raising my children, and it was published in 2022, and it's won 6 awards, including international and global book awards. And so I've been talking about my book, and it was quite the journey and quite different than I was used to as a journalist to write fiction. I did take a story that my mom, the cassette tapes were about her father's life, his adventures and near-death experiences in Europe and in America, and several major sections of the book have to do with the Holocaust and losing his whole family there, and clinical trials for a treatment for tuberculosis, and just a love story between 2 people and what you have to go through in life when someone is sick and the other has to take care of a family. So it's romance, it's adventure, it's drama, it's tragedy, and ultimately triumph. So it was definitely a different path, a side path for me, as I'm continuing my journalism also on. So two different branches of my writing career.
Yeah, and you've had a great career as a journalist. So tell us about, some of the things you've done, some of the maybe famous people you might interview, or some of the highlights of your career.
So I have interviewed Wolf Blitzer and Andy Gibb and Usher, or I've done stories that involve them and actually did meet them. Also, Hank Aaron is in that list, and a few others. But I've been a daily newspaper reporter. That's how I started, and I'm back doing a little bit of that now, probably not on that daily schedule as I was churning out stories every day at one point earlier in my career, covering beats, covering geographic areas, city government, police, fire, crime, and anything that happened. So in those areas that I covered in Florida and also in Birmingham, Alabama. And then I became a weekly newspaper reporter. So business, Jewish specialty, and then freelancing while I was raising my children and writing my book, Hands of Gold, by the way. So I went back and forth from freelancing while I was raising my children and writing the book, and then freelancing now. And in between, I was working full time for newspapers. And about a year ago, up until about a year ago, I was working at Medscape WebMD, where I'm now freelancing for them, covering some of my same beats that I covered before, which were medical students and residents, nurses and PAs, but I'm mostly doing the medical students and residents now. So, it's celebrity news. There was environmental, there was healthcare, business. So I've been around the block a bit, and it's not all glamour. I was stalking Liam Neeson for a while, and that seems very glamorous, but and I did get to see him a few times. I saw Tyler Perry when I was covering there was a death. His daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, overdosed, and and then ended up in hospice and passing away. And there were a lot of celebrities that passed through at that point, including Bobby Brown and Tyler Perry. And so some of it is glamorous and some of it isn't so glamorous. You're stalking, you're just sitting out and waiting for the story. So a sort of paparazzi. So I was a paparazzi for a while, a reporter for a bit. But right now I'm mostly working from home and contributing stories for those two publications, Medscape and Atlanta Journal-Constitution, with some stories on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So that's always very exciting. And when people see my stories, they'll tell me, and I love that too. It's a big ego boost.
Well, tell us about what it was like, or how difficult or easy was it to make the transition from journalist to author?
It was not easy, because even though I used a lot of the skills that I developed as a journalist in my writing, in my storytelling, in my research for the novel, making up dialogue was very difficult for me. One would say it would be fun and freeing, because I didn't have to. I could make it all up. I didn't have to stick to any set interview that somebody gave me. I did base the novel on the cassette tapes with my grandfather's voice throughout the book, but then I made up other interactions that he had and different thoughts that I thought he might have at the time. So that was challenging for sure, to not have all the information and have to plug in the information. The research, the storytelling was easier for me. I knew how to do that. I mean, it still takes a lot. This was before everything was all online. So I had to go physically to the archives, the National Archives, and discover census information and other documents that would help me in just being historically accurate in creating this novel and presenting the novel, so that nobody challenged me and said, no, this is not correct. I wanted it to be historically accurate in so many different ways. What they were saying, what their language would have been at the time, because this was early 1900s up until more present time. Actually, not. It was 1980s, 1990s. So from 1920s to 1990s, I had to change with the times. How would they refer to each other? What would they have been wearing? What was going on around them at the time? That all had to be captured in the novel to make it realistic. So very challenging, worthy of challenge, but to have accomplished that, but definitely took a lot of time and research. And since I was staying home with my children, raising my children instead of working full time, which was harder as a journalist, we try to raise a family. It's hard to do it all. Journalism is not a 9 to 5. It's a whenever to whenever the story breaks. So it was a lot to juggle. And so I did have the freedom of staying home with them, and I worked while they napped or while they were at school. So I found time to create my novels. So I think I've come a long way and definitely stretched myself to different, using different capabilities than talents that I didn't know I had. So that's always a great accomplishment.
Absolutely. Well, how did your family react to your book?
The reaction has been mostly positive, 99.9% positive. Many people uh, came out of the woodwork, even family I didn't know came out of the woodwork, and they contacted me and said, I read your book, or I heard about your book, and I knew your grandfather, and I didn't know all these stories. I'm glad you wrote these stories. I had some of that, like distant cousins I'm still friends with now, or communicate with now. Much, a lot of support. My mom, of course, is super proud of me. I had one aunt that wasn't so happy about it. She didn't think I asked permission, and I took a lot of liberties with the information, and there was some sex in the book, or innuendo, and that might not feel good to somebody if this is about their parents. I asked others that I was concerned about, what do you think about this, how I portrayed your family member, or this information that I shared in the book that was questionable? And they said, it's fiction, right? And I said, absolutely. So for some, that's okay. And for others, it feels too close to home. So I really only had one person that wasn't totally on board with me about the whole thing. But overall, the reaction has been very positive among readers, among family. Like I said, I won 6 awards, and I was an article was in the Jerusalem Post. I was in a book festival with Nikki Haley, Andrew Young, Benjamin Netanyahu from Livestream, Jodi Picoult, Robert Oren, Michael, I'm sorry, John Meacham. So there's so many different achievements within the book. So I'm very proud of all of that.
Let's take a quick break.
Okay, everybody, it's Michael E. Cullen II.
And I'm Sesame and Carta from the All Too Real 2 podcast. We're passionate about movies, TV, and pretty much all things pop culture.
Dive into the chaos of failed sitcoms, direct-to-video sequels, and the quirky realms of cinema and TV.
Join us every Thursday for your dose of All Too Real 2 entertainment.
We'll guide you through debates like whether Howard the Duck qualifies as a superhero.
Ponder if Larry the Cable Guy could be the new Rock or Schwarzenegger.
Discover if some shows and movies should have stayed in the cutting room.
Ever heard of a sitcom featuring that dictator with the funny mustache? Well, we watched it.
We're dedicated to unraveling the peculiarities of pop culture, sometimes with awesome guests.
So, if you're into the eccentric world of pop culture,
listen and subscribe to All Too Real 2.
Available wherever you find podcasts
and on Age of Radio.
It was. Seems like this book, was inspired by your grandfather, and he's a great inspiration to you. So, kind of tell us about what an inspiration he was to you.
Well, I didn't know him growing. I did, in fact, know him growing up. So I did get a sense of him from that. I know he was a religious man. What I knew, I had heard stories about him being sick, but I always knew my grandmother as the one that was lumbering, with heavy legs, and she had some kind of circulation problems in her legs that prevented her from walking well. But what I learned from the tapes um, was more about he was a clinical trial patient, sort of an experimental treatment for tuberculosis. He contracted tuberculosis and he was told he was terminal at 27, but he lived till 87. And part of that was because he was this clinical trial patient for, sort of a test case for this experimental treatment called streptomycin, which is still used today. And people don't know that, don't realize that tuberculosis is still the largest worldwide infectious disease killer, and globally. And we think COVID, but COVID is also a upper respiratory illness that's similar, but tuberculosis is still the biggest killer worldwide. And so he was on the ground level, groundbreaking, game-changing drug that is still used today and paved the way for the medicine that is used today to treat tuberculosis. So there was that. My grandmother had to be the breadwinner at a time when women were not breadwinners. They stayed at home with their families. She had 5 children to raise, while he was in and out of rehabilitation for tuberculosis and had to stay away from the family. He also was involved in a workplace shooting spree. He was a supervisor at a TB rehabilitation center. This was written about in the New York Daily News, which I freelanced for years later, ironically. But he actually talked to the gunman. There was a gunman, came in, was angry about not getting paid, shot up the place. My grandfather had what we call chutzpah, bravery, gall, to go up to the gunman and talk to him. Now, in my book, he also saves people by wrestling the gunman. But so there's that part of the story. He was a trolley driver and he accidentally killed somebody. There's that. They both lost much of their family in the Holocaust. They came here between the wars, but he left they both left all their family in Europe to come here to make that choice. And they wish that they could have done more. And also there, but for the grace of God go I, it could have been them. But they also had the guilt of, why didn't I do more? Why didn't I try harder? How could this even happen? Now, growing up, they didn't talk about this. So, it was hush hush around the children. So, this is all what I learned from listening to the cassette tapes and researching my family, and realizing how many of his family members died in Auschwitz and other concentration camps. So he had to live with that guilt throughout his life. So then there's the love story, the 65-year love story, and they died on the date of each other, a year apart, so that my grandmother, who was older, they actually were the same age when they both died. With that math, if you can figure it out, she was older, he died a year later, so they were both at the same age when they died, a year apart to the day. So I saw that was the initial spark. That was the love story, this 65-year love story. And at the beginning of the book, my grandmother says to my grandfather, do what you have to do to tie up loose ends and meet me in heaven. I almost named the book Meet Me in Heaven, but that was other people had used that for books and movies. So I chose Hands of Gold instead. But there's several other parts of the book involving the Holocaust, involving family. You go through a life of somebody and the lives of their children. If you span, from the 20s to the 90s, in 1920s to the 1990s. Actually, it goes back even further to 1905 when when my grandfather was born. So yeah, I think he was an interesting character. He had a personality and he had some humor too that's dispersed in the book, along with Yiddish, the language that they would have used at the time. A little bit of Yiddish with a glossary at the end that nobody knows is there apparently, but you get the context as you're reading it anyway, because that's what journalists do. Try not to make it hard on you to read anything. So there it is. He was an everyday just grandfather who had a history, and the message is that we all have stories to tell in our lifetime and worth sharing. So I just happen to have taken it a step further than the recordings that he left for the family, or articles or pictures. So I did research and created a novel out of it using the skills that God gave me to be able to do that.
Well, tell us about any upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to be aware of.
Well, I am starting to write a book based on my dad's life. He was a blacksmith. He was a metal worker. He also was involved in the Apollo space launches. He was a teacher of engineering. So he had an interesting life also. So apparently another male figure. The working title is A Mighty Arm. And I just started it. He passed away in March. So I've collected some documents and if I get any time between writing, for 2 publications and 3 editors, I think. I'm not even sure how many editors I have now, but I'm trying to fit in time to also achieve this in my life and write a book about my dad. Unlike my grandfather, he might not have wanted me to write a book. So I think he's working behind the scenes to keep me super busy so that I don't have time to, set aside for that. But otherwise, that's my goal. And I'm continuing to write articles for Medscape WebMD and really Medscape, and also for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So that's the newest. Those are the newest projects that are underway for me, and people can Google and read about anything they want about me. Usually, they can find me through my website, or just even Googling me and spelling my name right. You can find out a whole lot and read some of my articles. And my specialty is healthcare. So the articles and wellness. So the articles I've written about tuberculosis recently. My latest one that just came out was robots in a children's hospital. Night shifts was a recent one. So, anything and everything about healthcare and wellness and hospitals, I guess, and students, residents and students. So the medical community.
But throw out your website.
My website is www.RoniRobbins.com. You got to spell my name right. RoniRobbins. And you'll learn all about the book, all about the background to the book, where I'm speaking next, I have done, I've been talking to book clubs and women's groups and church and synagogue groups, and traveling around the country to do that in America. So far, not outside of the country, but always open to opportunities to speak to different groups about the book, about the themes of the book, which are very relevant to today, in fact, because of tuberculosis still in the news. War is a big part of the book. War raging in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and elsewhere. Anti-Semitism, hatred in the world. Those are some of the themes that are recurring in our life today. Battles with upper respiratory illnesses, COVID still is lingering, and others that people have to deal with. So you can learn so much about me, about the book. Some of my articles are in there, especially if they have to do with the book. Who's written about me, media, podcasts, which is my newest venture, is to be on podcasts like this one. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much as well. And listeners, please go check out Roni Robbins' work. Check out her book and all of her writings and everything that she's up to and gonna be up to. Please follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. Jump on your favorite podcast app, follow, check out the show, and share it. If you have any guest or suggestion topics, Curtis Jackson 1978 at att.net is the place to send them. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. Ronnie, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.